I never thought I'd be that guy, crying in a Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m, holding a screaming 3-week-old baby while frantically Googling how to make formula on my cracked phone. But there I was, Marcus Thompson, 23 years old, completely alone and absolutely terrified. It started 3 weeks earlier when Sarah walked out. Not gradually, not after a fight. She literally packed her bags while I was at work and left a note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this, Marcus. I'm not ready to be a mom. The baby is yours now. That was it. No forwarding address, no phone number, nothing. Just me and Dylan, this tiny human who depended on me for everything. I called my parents immediately. Mom picked up on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. Marcus, it's late. What do you want? Mum, I need help. Sarah left me with the baby. She's just gone. I don't know what I'm doing. Silence, then a heavy sigh. This is your mess, Marcus. We're not babysitters. I'm not asking you to babysit. I'm asking for help. Your grandson needs... Don't. Her voice turned ice cold. Don't you dare try to guilt trip us with that baby. You made your choice when you got that girl pregnant. Now deal with the consequences. My dad's voice echoed in the background. Tell him not to bring that baby here. We're not running a charity. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a full minute, Dylan crying in his carrier beside me. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Growing up, my parents always told me family comes first, that blood is thicker than water. But apparently, that only applied when it was convenient for them. See, I'd always been their golden child when it served their purposes. Straight A's in high school, they'd parade me around to their friends, star of the debate team. Suddenly I was the perfect son. But the moment I deviated from their script, the moment I needed something from them instead of giving them something to brag about, I became the scapegoat, like when I was 8 and broke my arm falling off my bike. Instead of comfort, I got lectures about being more careful and not embarrassing the family at the emergency room. Or when I was 16 and my girlfriend broke up with me right before prom. Instead of sympathy, I got told to man up and that real men don't cry over girls. But this felt different. This was my child, their grandson, and they were turning their backs on both of us. The next morning, I drove to their house anyway. Maybe if they saw Dylan, held him, they'd change their minds. I rang the doorbell with shaking hands, Dylan finally quiet in my arms after hours of crying. Dad answered the door, took one look at us, and shook his head. What did I tell you yesterday? Dad, please, just look at him. He's your grandson. He's your problem. He started to close the door, but I put my foot out to stop it. Mom! I called past him. Mom, please! She appeared behind him, arms crossed, face stone cold. Marcus, you need to leave. I just need somewhere to stay for a few days while I figure things out. The apartment lease is in Sarah's name, and I can't... You can't stay here, she interrupted. We've worked too hard to get where we are. We're not going backwards because you couldn't keep your girlfriend happy. This isn't about Sarah. This is about family. Dad stepped forward, his face red. Don't come here with that baby expecting us to clean up your mess. You made your choice when you decided to play house with some girl who clearly wasn't wife material. We told you she was trouble, but you wouldn't listen. Now you want us to fix it. Dylan started crying again, sensing the tension. I bounced him gently, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to help your son and grandson when we need you most. The answer is no. Mum's voice was final. Don't come back here, Marcus. Not with that baby. You want to be a father? Figure it out yourself. They closed the door in my face. I stood there for 10 minutes, hoping they'd change their minds, hoping they'd open the door and apologise and welcome us in. But they didn't. That was the last time I spoke to them for 5 years. The first few months were brutal. I found a tiny studio apartment that took half my paycheck from my entry-level IT job. Dylan cried constantly, colic, the paediatrician said, like that made the sleepless nights any easier. I'd work 8 hours, come home to a screaming baby, and spend the entire night walking him around the apartment, both of us crying. I taught myself everything through YouTube videos and parenting forums. How to change diapers properly, how to tell if a cry meant hungry versus tired versus sick. I memorised the ingredient lists of different formulas, learned to spot the early signs of ear infections, figured out which white noise apps actually worked at 3 a.m. There were days I thought I was failing him completely, like when he got his first fever and I rushed to the emergency room in a panic, only to be told it was just a mild cold. Or when I forgot to buy diapers and had to use dish towels until the store opened. I felt like every other parent in the world had some manual I'd never received. But slowly, we found our rhythm. I learned that Dylan slept better with classical music, that he loved being read to even before he could understand words, that peekaboo could stop almost any crying fit. I discovered I was actually pretty good at the technical parts of parenting. Tracking feeding schedules, monitoring developmental milestones, organising our tiny space for maximum efficiency. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into coding, staying late to learn new programming languages, volunteering for extra projects. My manager, Janet, noticed my dedication and started giving me more complex assignments. "You've got a good eye for problem solving, Marcus," she'd tell me. "Keep this up and you'll be senior level in no time." But the hardest part wasn't the sleepless nights or the constant worry about money, it was the loneliness. Dylan was an amazing baby, sweet, curious, hitting all his milestones early cut up. But I had no one to share those moments with. When he said his first word, Dada, which made me cry happy tears for the first time in months, I took a video and started to text it to someone before realising I had no one to send it to. My old friends had drifted away, unable to relate to my new life. My co-workers were friendly, but distant. I was the guy who had to leave exactly at 5 p.m. for daycare pickup, who couldn't join happy hours or weekend golf games. And my family, well, they'd made their position clear. The worst was when Dylan turned 1. I threw him a little party in our apartment, just me, him, a grocery store cake and some balloons. I sang Happy Birthday and watched him smear frosting all over his high chair, laughing and babbling happily. He was perfect. He was thriving, and no one else cared. That night, after he was asleep, I found myself scrolling through my phone, looking at pictures other parents posted of first birthday parties, grandparents holding cake-covered babies, extended families gathered around, multiple generations celebrating together. Dylan deserved that. He deserved grandparents who would spoil him and aunts and uncles who would teach him things I couldn't. But we didn't have that. We had each other, and somehow I had to make that enough. When Dylan was 18 months old, he started asking questions I couldn't answer. Well, not asking exactly. He wasn't talking in full sentences yet, but pointing at pictures of other families and looking confused when he only saw the two of us in our photos. At the park, he'd toddle toward elderly couples on benches, arms outstretched, clearly expecting the kind of attention other kids got from their grandparents. Gamma, Gampa, he'd say, using the words he'd picked up from other kids. I'd gently redirect him, my heart breaking a little more each time. How do you explain to a toddler that some grandparents just don't want to be grandparents? How do you tell your child that his own family chose not to love him? I started taking Dylan to story time at the library, hoping he'd get some of that extended family feeling from the elderly volunteers who read to the kids. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher in her 70s, took a special interest in us. She'd always save an extra hug for Dylan and would ask me how I was doing with genuine concern. "You're doing an amazing job, sweetheart," she'd tell me after particularly rough weeks. "That boy is lucky to have you." "Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough," I admitted one day, watching Dylan play with the other kids. "Love is always enough," she said firmly. "You show up for him every single day. You put his needs first. You're teaching him he's worthy of love and attention. That's what matters." But even Mrs. Henderson's kindness couldn't fill the grandfather-shaped hole in Dylan's life. At 2 years old, he'd point to other kids' family photos and ask, "Where Gamma Marcus?" I'd tell him we were each other's family, that families come in all sizes, that some people have big families and some have small ones, and both are perfect. He'd nod seriously, accepting my explanations with the trust that only small children have. But I could see the questions forming in his bright eyes. Meanwhile, my career was actually taking off. I'd been promoted twice, earned certifications in cloud computing and cybersecurity, and was making decent money for the first time in my life. I started looking at houses in better neighborhoods, imagining Dylan having a backyard to play in, his own room with space for all his books and toys. But success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. When I got my biggest promotion yet, senior systems engineer with a 30% salary increase, I celebrated by taking Dylan out for ice cream. He was 3 by then, old enough to understand that Daddy had good news, and he clapped his sticky hands and said, "Yay, Daddy!" with such genuine excitement that I almost cried right there in Dairy Queen. That night, after Dylan was asleep, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in 3 years. I pulled up my parents' contact information. My finger hovered over the call button. They were missing everything. Dylan's first steps, his first words, his incredible personality emerging day by day. He was funny and smart and kind, everything any grandparent would be proud of. Maybe if I called, if I tried one more time. But then I remembered that day on their doorstep, the coldness in their eyes when they looked at their crying grandson, the way they'd shut the door on both of us without a second thought. Some people didn't deserve second chances, especially when a child's heart was at stake. I deleted their number from my phone that night. Whatever family Dylan and I were going to have, we'd build it ourselves. By the time Dylan turned 4, we'd found our groove. I'd bought a small house in a family-friendly neighbourhood where kids played in the streets and neighbours actually knew each other's names. Dylan started pre-K at a school where I volunteered for every field trip and fundraiser. He was thriving, reading above grade level, making friends easily, showing an early aptitude for music that made me wonder if it came from Sarah's side of the family. We had routines and traditions that were just ours. Saturday morning pancakes while listening to jazz. Sunday afternoon adventures, hiking trails, children's museums, or just exploring new playgrounds. Bedtime stories that I'd learned to tell with different voices for all the characters, making Dylan giggle until he finally fell asleep. I'd even started dating again. Emma, Dylan's pre-K teacher, had caught my attention during parent conferences. She was patient and kind, genuinely interested in Dylan's development, and she didn't seem intimidated by the fact that I was a single parent. Our first coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into weekend family activities where Dylan would hold both our hands as we walked through the zoo or the science museum. "He's amazing," Emma would tell me. "You've raised an incredible little boy." And I had. Despite everything, despite the abandonment, the sleepless nights, the constant worry that I was doing everything wrong, Dylan was amazing. He was confident but not arrogant, curious about everything, empathetic beyond his years. When other kids at school were upset, Dylan was the one who'd offer to share his snacks or give hugs. When I had hard days at work, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "It's okay, Daddy, tomorrow will be better." We weren't just surviving anymore, we were thriving. Which made it all the more shocking when, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my parents standing on my front porch for the first time in 5 years. I almost didn't recognize them at first. 5 years had aged my parents in ways I hadn't expected. Dad's hair had gone completely grey, and Mum looked smaller somehow, more fragile. But their expressions were the same, that mixture of judgment and expectation that had defined my childhood. "Marcus," Mum said, as if we'd spoken yesterday instead of not at all for half a decade. I stood in my doorway, completely frozen. Behind me I could hear Dylan in the living room, practicing piano scales on the keyboard I'd bought him for his 5th birthday. The sound of his careful, methodical playing felt surreal against the sight of my parents on my front porch. "What are you doing here?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't soften them. Dad looked past me into the house, taking in what he could see of the foyer, the family photos on the wall, Dylan's backpack hanging on a hook, the general sense of a home that was lived in and loved. "We wanted to see how you were doing." "Now? After 5 years, now you want to see how I'm doing?" Mum shifted uncomfortably. "We've been thinking about you, about the baby, about Dylan." Hearing her say his name felt wrong. She'd forfeited the right to his name when she closed the door on us. "Dylan's not a baby anymore. He's 5. "We know," she said quietly. We've missed a lot." The understatement was so massive it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. "You missed everything by choice." "Daddy?" Dylan's voice came from behind me. He'd stopped playing piano and was walking toward the front door, curious about the visitors. "Who's here?" I turned slightly, keeping myself between Dylan and my parents. He looked up at me with those bright, trusting eyes, completely unaware that he was about to meet the grandparents who had rejected him before he could even hold his head up. "These are," I struggled with the words, "these are Daddy's parents." Dylan's face lit up with pure joy. "Gamma and Gampa? Really?" He tried to squeeze past me to get a better look, but I kept my arm across the doorway. The effect on my parents was immediate and visible. Mum's hand flew to her mouth, and Dad's stern expression cracked slightly. Dylan was beautiful. There was no denying that. 5 years old, with my dark hair, but these incredible light brown eyes that must have come from Sarah. He was wearing his favourite shirt, the one with planets on it, and had that slightly messy look of a kid who'd been playing all day. "Hello, Dylan," Mum said, her voice shaking slightly. "Hi." Dylan was practically bouncing with excitement. "I've been waiting to meet you forever. Do you want to see my room? I have a fish named Mr. Bubbles, and I can play 3 songs on the piano." The enthusiasm in his voice made my chest tight. This was what they'd thrown away. This incredible little person who was so ready to love them, so excited to finally have grandparents like all his friends did. "Can they come in, Daddy, please?" I looked at Dylan's hopeful face, and then at my parents' shocked expressions. They clearly hadn't expected this, a happy, well-adjusted child in a nice home. Whatever they'd pictured when they decided to show up, it wasn't this. "For a few minutes," I said finally, stepping aside. They walked into my house slowly, taking everything in. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself, the family photos covering the mantel, Dylan and me at the beach, at his preschool graduation, with Emma at the pumpkin patch last fall. The piano in the corner with Dylan's music books stacked neatly on top. The comfortable furniture that had taken me 3 years to afford, but was exactly what I'd wanted for our home. "This is nice," Dad said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. Dylan grabbed Mum's hand without hesitation, the way he did with everyone. "Come see my fish. His tank is in the kitchen, and he does tricks." As Dylan led them toward the kitchen, chattering about Mr. Bubbles' impressive swimming skills, I followed behind, watching my parents' faces. They kept looking around like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The kitchen was bright and clean, with Dylan's artwork covering the refrigerator and a chore chart where he got gold stars for feeding the fish and putting away his toys. "This is Mr. Bubbles," Dylan announced proudly, pointing to a bright blue betta fish swimming in a carefully maintained tank. "Daddy says he's a good fish because he's been alive for 8 whole months. That's like 4 years in fish time." "He's very beautiful," Mum said, crouching down to Dylan's level. "You take good care of him." "Daddy taught me. He says pets are a big responsibility. I have to feed him every morning and check his water." "Watch this." Dylan dropped a pellet into the tank, and Mr. Bubbles swam up eagerly. "See? He knows me." Dad was studying the chore chart. "You help with a lot of things around the house." "Uh-huh. I set the table and put my clothes in the hamper and water the plants on the porch." "Daddy says we're a team." Dylan looked at me with such obvious adoration that I felt my throat tighten. "Right, Daddy?" "That's right, buddy." Mum stood up slowly, still looking around the kitchen. "You've done well, Marcus. This is a real home." The comment stung more than it should have. "What did you expect?" "We thought," Dad started then stopped. "You thought I'd fail." It wasn't a question. "You thought you'd show up and find me struggling, maybe needing your help finally." They didn't deny it, which was answer enough. "Can we play a game?" Dylan asked, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "I have Candyland and chutes and ladders, or we could build with my Legos." "Actually, Dylan, why don't you show them your piano playing first?" I suggested. I wanted them to see how talented he was, how much he'd accomplished without them. Dylan's face absolutely glowed. Okay, I know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and Mary Had a Little Lamb, and Happy Birthday? Miss Sarah says I'm her best student? He ran to the piano bench and carefully positioned his small hands on the keys. The melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star filled the room, played with the concentrated precision of a 5-year-old who'd been practicing diligently. When he finished, he turned to my parents with a huge smile. "That was wonderful," Mum said, and for the first time since they'd arrived, her voice sounded completely genuine. "You're very talented. Daddy says music is good for your brain, and it's fun. Do you want to hear another one?" Before anyone could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see Emma's car in the driveway. "That's Miss Emma," Dylan announced, jumping up from the piano bench. "She's Daddy's girlfriend, and she's the best teacher ever." I went to answer the door, leaving my parents in the living room with Dylan, who had immediately launched into an explanation of who they were. "Hey," Emma said, giving me a quick kiss. "How was your day? Dylan texted me from your phone that he wanted to show me something he learned at piano lessons." "Actually, we have visitors," I said, lowering my voice. "My parents showed up unexpectedly." Emma's eyebrows shot up. She knew the whole story, how they'd abandoned us, how we'd built our life without them. "Oh, are you okay?" "I don't know yet. Dylan's over the moon, obviously." We walked back into the living room together, where Dylan was now showing my parents his collection of books, proudly reading the first few pages of Green Eggs and Ham aloud. "Mom, Dad, this is Emma," I said. "Emma, these are my parents." Emma stepped forward with the warm professionalism she used with all parents. "It's nice to meet you. Dylan talks about you all the time." I saw my parents exchange a look. "He does?" "Oh, yes," Emma continued, oblivious to the landmine she'd just stepped on. "He's always asking questions about grandparents, wondering when he'll get to meet you. He sees other kids with their grandparents at school events and gets so excited thinking about when you'll come to one of his programs." The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan looked between all the adults, sensing something was wrong, but not understanding what. "We've been busy," Mum said finally. Emma's expression shifted slightly as she picked up on the tension. "Of course, life gets hectic." "Miss Emma comes to all my school stuff," Dylan piped up, trying to fill the awkward silence. "She came to my winter concert and my art show, and when we did the play about community helpers, I was a firefighter." "That sounds wonderful," Dad said stiffly. The conversation limped along for another hour. My parents asked polite questions about Dylan's school and hobbies, clearly trying to play catch-up on 5 years of his life in one afternoon. Dylan answered enthusiastically, completely unguarded in the way only children can be. He showed them his room, his toys, his drawings, desperately trying to cram a lifetime of grandparent-grandchild bonding into a single visit. But I could see what this really was. They weren't here because they'd realised their mistake or because they'd missed us. They were here because they were curious. Maybe they'd heard through mutual acquaintances that I was doing well. Maybe they'd seen my LinkedIn profile showing my job promotions. Maybe they'd simply decided enough time had passed that they could show up without losing face. whatever their motivation, it had nothing to do with wanting to be grandparents and everything to do with not wanting to miss out on something that might benefit them. When they finally said they had to leave, Dylan's face fell. "But you just got here. Can you come back tomorrow? I want to show you my school and introduce you to my friends." "We'll see, sweetheart," Mum said, but she was looking at me, not him. After they left, Dylan was unusually quiet. Emma helped me put him to bed while he peppered us with questions about when his grandparents would visit again, whether they'd come to his school program next week, if they'd want to see him play piano again. They seemed surprised, Emma said, carefully once Dylan was asleep, and we were cleaning up the living room. They expected to find me failing, struggling single dad who'd finally learned his lesson and needed their help. And instead they found everything they said I'd never be able to provide for him. I picked up Dylan's piano books and straightened them on top of the instrument. They saw a happy kid in a nice home with people who love him, and they realised they're the ones who've been missing out. Emma nodded slowly. "Are you going to let them back in?" It was the question I'd been avoiding all evening. I don't know, Dylan was so happy to meet them. But I can't let them hurt him, and I know they will. Maybe not intentionally, but they will. That's who they are. They love conditionally. When things are good, when it benefits them, they're all in. But the moment things get difficult, the moment Dylan needs something from them, instead of just being a cute grandchild to show off, they'll disappear again. "You don't have to decide tonight," Emma said gently. But I was already deciding. Watching Dylan's pure joy at meeting his grandparents, followed by his confusion when they left after just 2 hours, had crystallized something for me. They'd already hurt him just by showing up unprepared to fully commit to being in his life. The next morning, Dylan woke up asking when Gamma and Gampa were coming back. When I told him I didn't know, he accepted it with the resilience of a child who'd learned early that adults don't always follow through on their promises. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes, and it broke my heart. That afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom, Marcus, we'd like to take Dylan for the weekend. Maybe we could..." No? What do you mean, no? I mean, no. You don't get to waltz back into our lives after 5 years and start making demands. We're not making demands. We want to get to know our grandson. Where were you when he had pneumonia at 6 months old and I spent 3 days in the hospital with him? Where were you for his first steps, his first words, his first day of preschool? Where were you when he asked me why some kids have grandparents and he doesn't? We made mistakes, Marcus. We want to fix that. You don't get to fix it. You get to live with the consequences of your choices, just like you told me to do 5 years ago. There was a long pause. He's our grandson. Biology doesn't make you grandparents. Being there makes you grandparents. You chose not to be there. We could take you to court. Grandparents have rights. The threat hit me like a physical blow, but it also clarified everything. This was exactly who they were, the same people who'd slam a door in a baby's face were now threatening legal action to force their way into that same child's life. "Try it," I said quietly. "Explain to a judge why you rejected your infant grandson and then tried to claim rights to him 5 years later. Explain why you have no relationship with either of us. no history of support, no involvement in his life whatsoever. Marcus, I have 5 years of documentation, medical records showing I was the only parent listed for every appointment. School records with only my name and Emma's as emergency contacts. Photos of every birthday, every holiday, every milestone you missed. I have a community of people who've watched me raise Dylan alone, who know you've never been part of his life. My voice was getting stronger, steadier. More importantly, I have a 5-year-old who deserves better than grandparents who show up when it's convenient and disappear when it's not. Dylan has people who love him unconditionally. He has stability and security and a family that chose to be there for him every single day. We're his blood family. Emma reads to him every night. Mrs. Henderson from the library remembers his birthday and brings him special books. Our neighbour Mr. Garcia taught him to ride a bike and cheers at his soccer games. That's his family. Those are the people who've earned the right to be in his life. I took a deep breath. You had your chance to be his grandparents. You threw it away before he could even hold his head up. You don't get another chance just because you've realised what you're missing. You're making a mistake, Marcus. The only mistake I made was opening my door yesterday. Don't come back. Don't call. We're done. I hung up and immediately blocked their numbers. Then I sat down and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. For 5 years, I'd carried this tiny hope that maybe someday they'd realise their mistake and want to be part of our lives. Yesterday had killed that hope completely, and losing it felt like setting down a weight I hadn't realised I'd been carrying. That evening, Dylan asked again when his grandparents were coming back. "They're not, buddy," I told him gently. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt people they love. My parents made a choice a long time ago, and they're not ready to be the kind of grandparents you deserve. Dylan thought about this seriously, the way he did when processing difficult concepts. Like how Tommy's dad promised to come to his birthday party but didn't. Sort of like that, yeah. That made Tommy really sad. I bet it did. Are you sad about Gamma and Gampa? Dylan considered this. A little, but I have you and Miss Emma and Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Garcia and Miss Sarah for piano and... He started listing all the adults in his life who loved him and showed up for him. And the list was longer than I'd realised. Somewhere along the way, while I'd been focused on what Dylan didn't have, he'd built an entire extended family of choice. I think that's enough people to love me, he concluded matter-of-factly. More than enough, I agreed. 6 months later, Emma and I got engaged. Dylan was our ring bearer, proudly carrying the symbol of our commitment to be a family together. At the wedding, he had both grandparents and great-grandparents. Emma's family had welcomed us with open arms from the beginning. He had aunts and uncles and cousins who sent him birthday cards and Christmas presents and actually showed up for the important moments. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not giving my parents another chance, if I think about how different things might have been. But I don't have regrets. Dylan grew up knowing his worth wasn't conditional, knowing that real family shows up when it matters, knowing that he was chosen and wanted and celebrated every single day. That Tuesday afternoon when my parents appeared on our doorstep, they expected to find a broken man who needed saving. Instead, they found something that shocked them to their core. a father and son who had not just survived without them, but thrived. They found a family that was complete exactly as it was. And in trying to insert themselves into that completeness, they revealed exactly why they'd never been part of it in the first place.